So this week's speaker is Dr. Haley Sater. She is the Ag and Food System Agent for Wacomico County, and her background is in fruit production, specifically small fruit production. So she has typically given talks about berry production for this Backyard Gardener series, but this year we wanted to switch it up and talk about some of the more unique fruits that you may decide to grow in a mid-Atlantic backyard, especially if you've got a little bit more space and you want a little bit more of a challenge than, say, your typical raspberries, blueberries, strawberries, and stuff like that. So without further ado, Haley, you can take it away.
Yeah, thank you, Emily. Like Emily said, I'm Haley. I am the Wycomico County Ag Agent, so I'm out of Salisbury, Maryland on the Eastern Shore. But I'm going to be talking about a bunch of fruits that you can grow in most of the Mid-Atlantic and a lot of other places in the US. They're fruit that just don't get as much attention because we tend not to see them in grocery stores, but that doesn't mean that they aren't delicious and that I think especially because you can't necessarily get them in a grocery store, that's another reason to try to grow them at home. Just a quick introduction here. So, well, I kind of already talked about this. Why would you want to try these fruits? Well, because they are different. Some of these, like for instance, black currants or elderberries, have really high nutraceutical properties. So I know elderberries, and I think black currants have really high polyphenol content. So those are some of the compounds that are anti-cancerous, that are very good for you. Others of these fruits are probably good for you as well. Most of them will have fiber, vitamin C, and other things that are good for you. And the fruit that I will specifically be talking about today are figs, persimmons, pawpaws, gooseberries, currants, elderberries, and kiwiberry. I'll have a couple of slides on each, and hopefully by the end of this talk, you'll have an idea if you want to grow any of these or all of them, and more or less how you can grow them. Okay, so we're going to start with figs because I feel like I get a lot of questions about figs most years, and they tend to come from like small producers or backyard fig growers. Just to start this off, why are figs great for the Mid-Atlantic? Well, they're relatively hardy and disease resistant. That said, figs are not native to this region, so they're native to more of the Middle East and Mediterranean region. So they love the heat. Some varieties tolerate humidity better than others, but the varieties that we'll be talking about are all things that do well here. If you are on the Eastern Shore like I am, or in Zone 7 and warmer, most figs can be grown outside and they will overwinter. That said, you need to make sure that you get a cultivar that makes sense in this part of the US. So the cultivars that I have listed here are things that we can grow here in Maryland. And then this cultivar, Chicago Hardy, which is aromatic, that one I think can grow up to zone like 5. So pretty much anywhere in the Mid-Atlantic, you can grow that type of fig. Some of these other figs, I don't know that they're going to overwinter quite as well. So if you're worried, you're out in Garrett County or maybe you're out in New York, I would try to grow the most cold hardy fig you can, because having a fig that survives is always the best, better than one of these that's super sweet but doesn't survive. Celeste, or celestial, it's sometimes called, is a very sweet fig variety. This Ron Bordeaux, I hope I'm saying that right. I do not speak French. That's supposed to be a really high yielder. I will say I do not grow figs, and that's because I don't really love. I'll eat a fig, but they are not my favorite fruit ever. I think people who like figs really like figs a lot of the time, and people who are, well, at least people like me are kind of like, it's a fig, it's okay. I like crunchy fruit, and I like sour things, so most of these are very sweet. The brown turkey tails are also, there are a couple of different varieties that are called brown turkey tail. The one that I recommend because it has large fruit, it's early, is Olympian. So just be aware if you're shopping for a fig or you see a fig on sale in Home Depot. These are some varieties that should be pretty safe to grow here. Just because a fig is being sold in Maryland doesn't mean that it makes sense to grow, because some of the varieties, even if they'll overwinter, they may make their fruit so late that you're not going to get fruit. So basically, the fig fruits take a long time to ripen on the tree. I think like 90 to 120 days or something. So if they're too late, you're going to have rock hard figs by the first frost, and then it's all over. I had two people call me last year in October wondering why their figs weren't ripe. And part of that, I think, was the drought. Just that we didn't have rain. So if you weren't irrigating them, they weren't getting enough water to continue ripening those fruit. But they may also have been varieties that really weren't the best choice for this region. So just be aware of that. It sucks to plant a tree and wait 4 years for it to produce fruit and then figure out, oh, it's really not the right variety of fig for this region, and I'll never be able to get fruit from it. Um, okay, so some tips for actually growing figs. If you want to grow them in the ground, you want to plant them in a place with full sun. So they can get really big, but you can prune them and keep them at a height where you can actually pick off of them and kind of make them grow wider, more like a peach tree than tall, because most people don't want to get up on a ladder to pick figs. You can prune them in the late winter. You want to do this not too early, so not in December and January, because sometimes that can cue them to start growing if we have some warm days. So wait for it to warm up a little bit. Fruit season is going to be August through October. If you're choosing a variety that makes fruit in October, you may not get fruit every year because they're not going to make fruit. Their fruit is not going to be good after the first frost. So if you are in a colder place, I know that a lot of folks who grow figs in, say, New Jersey, will grow them in containers. So you can put them in like a 15 or a 20-gallon pot. And if you're doing this, I mean, it's usually because you have cold winters. So what you're going to do is bring that pot inside somewhere, preferably a place that's not too warm. So like a garage or a barn, someplace that is going to be warm enough that they're not going to be as cold as they would be outside, but not as warm as they would be inside in a house that's climate controlled. You want to more or less stop watering them, maybe water them once a month. They're going to defoliate and they're going to go dormant. So you really don't want to be giving them too much water. They're not going to use it, and it could cause their roots to rot if you give them too much water. And then you bring them back outside when it's starting to warm up, like in April. So actually, a little before now would have been the right time to bring them back outside. So, and this is a picture from the Maryland Grows blog with a master gardener and her figs. So I thought this was a cool picture. There are all these different colors of figs, and they have varying flavor profiles. So if you like figs, I think they would be a fun one to grow. And if you have enough space in your yard, because they are a relatively large, they get big. Okay. Persimmons are another fruit, are non-native, but also native to the US. So the most common persimmon, if you have seen persimmons in grocery stores, or a lot of times you'll see them at Asian markets, are Japanese persimmons. They are larger than American persimmons. Of the Japanese types of persimmons, they're what are called the astringent and the non-astringent types. And all American native persimmons would fall into the astringent category. So what I mean by that, and if you've ever eaten a persimmon that's not fully ripe, you know what I'm talking about. This is how I was first introduced to persimmons. I tried a not totally ripe native American variety of persimmon, and it's like a really, really dry wine. The astringency makes your mouth feel like all of the moisture is being sucked away. So it's a very unpleasant feeling if you eat an unripe, astringent type of persimmon. So you basically have to know that you're harvesting it when those astringent, I think they're probably tannin compounds, have denatured. So you have to wait for those types of persimmons to get soft before you eat them. There is, if you go online and look up stuff about persimmons, people will say that they need a frost to become sweet. That's also something people say about citrus, but they don't really need that. They need cool temperatures. They need cool nights to start becoming sweet and ripening up, but they don't need a frost per se. Things to consider if you're going to be planting a persimmon. You want to plant them in the spring, kind of around this time, like right at the beginning of the growing season. They really want to be in full sun. My advice to you would be to keep them pruned because they can get fairly large, and then it can be difficult to harvest all of the fruit if you let them get to their full mature height. But they are going to take usually at least 4 years before they give you fruit. So if you can and you're willing to pay the extra money, maybe get like a 2 to 3 year old plant so that you get fruit sooner. And then in terms of pollination, many persimmons are self-fertile, but they will make larger fruit with more seeds usually, so that causes the fruit to be bigger. And they may make more overall fruit if you put two different persimmons together. So if they have cross-pollination. So we would recommend that you plant two. And the best varieties of Japanese persimmons to choose are probably these four on the bottom: Proc, Yates, Fuya, and Izu. I don't know if I'm saying this right, but those are kind of what we recommend. Persimmon is another fruit where I've had it ripe, I've had it not ripe, and it's just not my favorite. I would suggest that if you're interested in growing persimmons as a food crop, go try one before you plant it because like I'm not going to grow a persimmon tree because to me they're a little they're so sweet and they don't have very much acid. And I think I need like my fruit to have a lot more tartness for me to enjoy it. I'm more of a blueberry, raspberry, blackberry. Those are my favorite fruits. So pawpaws, these are a fruit that I feel like I've been hearing a lot about in the news. There is some commercial pawpaw production in different parts of the Northeast and the Mid-Atlantic, and even places like Kentucky, and I think probably Tennessee too. This is the largest native fruit to the United States. So you can find it growing wild in the woods. Usually it's going to be growing next to a stream or kind of a wet place. So you do want to make sure that if you plant a pawpaw, it really likes to have a water source. Or that said, we have a pawpaw that is growing right in front of my office. There's no water source there and it does just fine. We have very sandy soils, but that's where they grow in the wild. The fruit are similar to a custard apple, is how they're described, but I don't think many Americans have had a custard apple. So I think the fruit is very creamy, or custardy. It's kind of this white to orangish color, depending on the variety or what you find. These will like fall down in the woods, and you can eat them in the fall. So those are the types that I've had. And then they have these really big seeds here that you can see in the bottom right-hand picture. The flavor of pawpaws, some people really like them, and I think if you're really into tropical fruits like banana and mango, I don't think they're as aromatic or strong as a mango. I usually get more banana notes. One of the things that you can do with them is turn them into like custards or sorbets. They're a really interesting fruit, and I think part of the reason that they're not sold commercially is they have a really short shelf life. So it kind of makes sense if you're going to grow them, you kind of need to harvest them and figure out what you're going to do with them quickly or freeze them, like process them in some way because they don't keep that long once they're ripe. and then they ripen in August, or really the end of August, beginning of September is when you can go out and find them in the wild. In terms of growing pawpaws, in order to get fruit, you are going to need more than one tree. They do require that cross-pollination, so you need enough space to grow two pawpaw trees, or know that there's a pawpaw tree close by. They take quite a few years to get to maturity, so to be able to make fruit, that's going to be at least 4 years. So again, if you can buy an older tree, you can shorten that juvenility period where they're not making fruit. You can plant them in the sun or the shade. In the forest, they can be kind of an understory tree, so they can tolerate shade, and they can get up to 35 feet high if you don't keep them short. These guys really do want to they want to grow like a tree, so they tend to get pretty big. And then these are some cultivar recommendations on the bottom: sunflower, Shenandoah, and KSU Atwood. There are a couple other varieties of pawpaws, and you could plant them from seed from a wild pawpaw tree, but I would generally recommend choosing a variety, because you never know what the fruit quality is going to be of something that you just plant from seed. That's going to be totally random. It will not be same as its parents, so it could have really terrible fruit. Who knows? So I would kind of recommend getting something from a nursery. All right, moving on to gooseberries. These are actually a fruit that I really enjoy eating, but I want to start out by saying gooseberries are technically not allowed to be grown in a whole bunch of states in the Northeast / Mid-Atlantic. So Delaware, Maine, North Carolina, New Hampshire, and West Virginia technically have a ban on gooseberries. There was a whole US ban a couple hundred years ago, and the reason for this is because gooseberries can be an alternative host for a disease called white pine blister rust, which was a crippling disease for white pine producers, so for the forestry industry. For that reason, they outlawed this gooseberries, and we'll talk about currants. So Maryland, you are technically allowed to grow gooseberries if you have a white pine tree in your yard and you're very fond of it. Maybe you don't want to grow these, just because they can be an alternative host for this disease. What I will say about gooseberries is they are quite thorny, which is probably my least favorite trait about the bush, but otherwise I think they're a very attractive shrub. The fruit have a pretty sour flavor, but it is a very nice aromatic flavor, I think. So I would kind of describe them as rhubarb / a grape. The texture is kind of like a grape. They pop in your mouth, at least the ones that I've had. Traditionally, they've been used in pies and jellies. A lot of times when I go to Amish markets, I will see gooseberry jams or jellies for sale. Some gooseberry cultivars, and I think pretty much all of the types that I'm going to talk about, or cultivars I talk about, are more related to the native US types, but there are gooseberries that are native to Europe. They're technically two different species, but I think you can hybridize them if you were breeding them. So when you look up literature about gooseberries, a lot of it is from northern universities, like University of Minnesota, I think University of Washington, or Washington State, I should say, provided the bottom right picture. So they're grown a lot in northern parts of the US, but you can grow them as far south as Zone 8, which is our warmest zone in Maryland. My cultivar recommendations are this red one that's at the top. I know this Pixwell is pretty good. That's one of the varieties that I've actually had. And then there's some other ones on here, like Black Velvet, I don't have a picture of, but that one's supposed to be pretty aromatic. They are self-fertile, so you don't necessarily need another variety to cross-pollinate, and you can plant them in a place that isn't totally full sun. They tend to like full sun. They may not make quite as many fruit, but they don't mind cooler They won't mind having some afternoon shade. They can range from 3 to 5 feet tall and about equally as wide. You want to keep them pruned. I would recommend pruning right before start leafing out. So that'd be usually in Maryland, that'd be around March. And then the biggest challenge that people who grow gooseberries tend to have is a disease called powdery mildew. It affects a lot of different plants, but this is kind of what it looks like in this bottom right picture here. It's pretty ugly, so what you want to do, if you see it in your planting, try to get rid of it and get like prune anything that has powdery mildew off and remove it from the area, because if you just leave it on the ground, those spores can still travel in the air and then reinfect the plant. And we always want to get rid of diseased plant tissue, and not just, leave it on the ground next to the plant that it, can cause the disease on. Currants are very closely related to gooseberries. They're all in the ribes genus. They are also not allowed to be planted in the same states that gooseberries are not allowed to be planted in. They are also tart berries. They're a little bit smaller than gooseberries, and the red, white, and like kind of greenish, those are also translucent like a gooseberry, which I think it just they look really cool because they're kind of see-through. Currants usually they're kind of more opaque. They are thornless, which is something that may be attractive to people. And they're not quite as tart as a gooseberry. So I kind of already mentioned there are these red, pink, and white currants. They are all one species of currant, and then the black currants are another species, this Ribes nigrum. Yeah, they're primarily used in most of the currant varieties are European types, but there is an American type of black currant. It's just that the American type of black currant, I don't think anybody produces for food. So all of these types that you would see commercially, sold by different nurseries, would be the European non-native types. As far as growing black currants, they can be grown from Canada, basically down to Maryland or maybe even parts of North Carolina because they grow in zones 3 to 8. They appreciate a little bit of afternoon shade. So they're very similar to a gooseberry. You can put them in a spot that gets half shade, especially in the afternoon. Again, their biggest problem is they're susceptible to powdery mildew. The red and the pink and the white currants are self-fertile. The black currants are not. We do have a couple of cultivars we recommend for Maryland. Um, Elderberries are the next fun and kind of unusual crop. These are small purplish black berries that grow on pretty large shrubs. You will see them growing on the side of the road. They are native enough to Maryland that, they're everywhere. And the birds scatter the seeds around, so they pop up everywhere. They have a really pleasant floral, sweet aroma. And I will say that if you plant an elderberry plant, the deer like it and birds like it. So I know that one of the a tea producer in my area who grows elderberry, she says her biggest pests are birds. Yeah, and then what I want to mention before we talk about really eating elderberries is that you do not eat them raw. They are toxic to humans if eaten raw because they have these cyanogenic glycosides in them. So basically, they have chemicals in them that, if eaten raw, will be digested by our body into cyanide, which obviously will kill us. So you don't want to eat elderberries by the handful, but when they're properly cooked or dried, they are edible, and they have been used for a long time. So there are elderberries that are native to this region. There is also a European type of elderberry, and I think it's in a bunch of fairy tales and stories. But the American elderberries are a different species than the European elderberries. The European elderberries get bigger. The American elderberry is shorter, which I think is actually good because it's easier to harvest. You don't want a 20-foot tall tree that you have to harvest off of. So, as far as actually growing elderberries, we have some cultivars. These are all American types that we recommend. York, let's see here, Scotia, John, Nova, Adams, and is that Wildwood? These are all types that are grown for commercial production. Elderberries are pretty easygoing in terms of they can tolerate a lot of different soil conditions. So even if you have really heavy clay soils, they usually will do all right. They do like full sun, but you can get away with partial shade. They just may not make as many fruit. You do want to prune them, so you'd prune them in the winter. And what you want to do is you want to take out all of the older wood. So all of the at least 3-year-old canes you should get rid of, and some of the 2-year-old canes. And what that's going to do is cue more new cane growth because they kind of grow like blueberries. You can see they shoot up these new canes every year. If you don't prune them, they'll kind of get to be about up to like 13 feet tall, which makes them very difficult to harvest from. So you don't want that. And then if you were growing these as a hedge or something, you want to put at least 6 feet in between each bush. I guess you could plant them a little bit closer if you wanted them to be a hedge, but if you want to be able to get around the whole bush, give them at least 6 feet. And then many of these cultivars are self-fertile, but they'll do better if they have a pollinizer. So it is better to have another variety than just one. You'll get more fruit. Okay, how to use elderberries since you can't eat them raw. So typically they would be cooked or dried, and I actually have some elderberry here. Oh, there. Okay, so this is just a jar of dried elderberries here that I use in tea. So these were commercially dried. I didn't do it myself. I don't actually know how to commercially dry them, but I bought them this way. And these are elderberry flowers, which also can be used in teas, or I think they get used in cocktails, desserts. I put them in my tea and they smell really good. They're just very lovely. They add this floral aromatic to some of the tea that I drink. So, yeah, traditionally elderberries get turned into syrups, jams, jellies, sauces, I guess pies. I've never had an elderberry pie, but I would certainly try it. Wine and cocktails. And they have been used as a traditional medicine in a lot of parts of Europe. They obviously this deep purple color here. These are the pigmented probably anthocyanins. I actually don't know what the pigment molecule is here, but most pigment molecules are antioxidants, so they are good for you in that way. Moving on to kiwi berries. So kiwi berries or hardy kiwis, these are a different species than the kiwis that you're probably familiar with at the grocery store. The kiwis that usually we see at the grocery store, they're generally coming from Italy or New Zealand. Those are not going to tolerate our cold winters here in Maryland, but this kiwi berry, it's smaller and it's native to Eastern Asia. It will tolerate up to, I think, zones like 5. So you can grow it anywhere in Maryland. These fruits are about the size of a grape, and what I like about them is they're less hairy than a kiwi, so you can eat the whole thing. And they generally ripen in September, and you can also pick them and store them a long time, which is what they do with kiwis in the kiwis that we're more familiar with in the store. Those they get picked rock hard, and then they sit in storage for a long time until they ripen up and then kind of get sent places. So growing this hardy kiwi berry, you can plant it late in the spring, probably after a last frost is what's recommended. So really, if you want to plant a hardy kiwi berry, now would be a great time. They grow very vigorously. They're going to put out a lot of growth, and they are a vine. So they require some kind of structure or trellis. You could put them on a fence. You need to support them somehow, otherwise they're just going to grow on the ground and It's really not ideal. You don't want to be picking fruit on the ground. If you're going to be planting, you will need two types. So you want to space them out at least 10 feet apart because they end up taking up a lot of space. They will take a couple of years to get to maturity to actually make fruit. So that can take 3 years, 3 to 5 years, I should say. In terms of selecting a site, you do want to have a place with good sun, good drainage. They're not going to tolerate really wet soils. Your pH, it can be in about a normal range. 6 is good for growing these guys. So if you grow them in containers, which, here we can grow them in the ground, so I don't really know why you'd want to grow them in containers, but if you are growing them in containers, you may have to move them to some place where they will be somewhat protected in the winter because the roots cannot take a really hard freeze. And that's what happens in containers, in the soil will stay warmer than plants in a container over the winter. They're considered a dioecious species, and so are regular kiwis that we find in the store. So this means that you need a female plant and a male plant, and they should, when you look at the varieties, it will say if it's a female or a male. So you need to have both, otherwise you're not going to get fruit. All right. And these are the cultivars that we actually recommend on the Maryland Home and Garden Information Center website. So there's this 74 series, apparently has a female and male option. There's Anna, which is a female. There's the Geneva series, that's female. And then I'm looking for the male. Okay, this meter is male or female options. So, yeah, take a look at some of these varieties and see, um, which one think sounds the best. I kind of like these ones that have the red blush. I think that's kind of pretty in the fruit. Okay, so just a quick kind of wrap it all up since we talked about a lot of different fruits. In conclusion, there is a lot of different fruit that you can grow in Maryland that you won't even find in the grocery store. So these are all great options that should do well here. Many of these can be grown in full sun, but some of them can tolerate shade. Many of these fruit species are actually native to Maryland, so if that's something that you want to keep your garden native, you can still incorporate some of these. And many of these fruit are not widely available in, I would say, most nurseries. So, my advice to you is look up the cultivars that make sense in Maryland. Also, I will send these slides, and if you want a very specific cultivar, you may have to look for it online or just call and check with some nurseries that are around you. Some of them do. I just know that around me it would be hard for me to find a very specific variety of, say, kiwiberry. So I'd probably end up having to order it online. Okay, so you would like more information. Some of this I got right off of the Home and Garden Information Center, which is part of our University of Maryland Extension website. This great article called Less Common Fruits for Home Gardens. It'll talks about most of these fruit varieties or fruit types. Thank you all. Bye, everybody.
Bye, everybody.